Hi, I'm Jess CEO and founder of Rework It.
I'm Teresa Sweeney, a senior executive in finance and author, and this is Rewritten. Real talk for working moms who want it all.
This is a podcast hosted by two successful working moms and friends who define success on their own terms and in very different ways.
But if there's one thing we both agree on, it's this: you can't have it all, but you can have everything you want. The rules just have to be rewritten. Hi, and welcome back to Rewritten. I'm Teresa Sweeney here with Jess Wass, and we are very excited today to continue the conversation that we started last week around energy. We obviously were having a whole lot of fun with this discussion, talking so much about how our habits around food, nutrition, and movement in particular, and really how we managed our energy throughout the day made such a big impact on how we feel and how we show up in all of the areas of our lives that are important to us. And there were a couple things that we didn't get to talk about last time that we really wanted to make sure that we spend some time unpacking as well, given how important these are. The two in particular are both sleep and mindset. And there's a whole lot we can say on both. Obviously, sleep in particular is one of those for working moms that can often feel like a luxury that is very hard to attain. So maybe we start there, Jess.
Yeah, and it's very top of mind for me because I have the younger children between the two of us. So I have just entered I'm still in this period where you don't know if the baby's gonna wake up in the middle of the night, and this was the hardest transition for me in becoming a parent, and it was also what I anticipated would be the hardest thing given how much people talk about sleep or lack of sleep when it comes to babies. So I think the best thing that we did for ourselves was listen and take that seriously and talk before the baby came around how are we gonna handle that? Because I think having strategies around that before baby came helped us handle the challenges when they actually showed up, even if it didn't solve for everything. So that's what's very top of mind for me. And that was the hardest part for me dealing with an infant. I don't normally function well without good sleep, usually table stakes for my well being. I was never the student in college who pulled all nighters. I think I did that once at the end of while she was this very special event called 13, which we don't need to get into. But that was probably the only time in my life I ever pulled an all nighter, and that was for a fun activity. Um, and it's just not something that's part of who I am. I need sleep. I enjoy my sleep. I get sleep. And having an infant completely messed it up for me. What about you? Do you remember
Yeah.
those days?
Oh my God. Yeah. It feels like a distant memory, but also hearing you
Oh,
talk
that's good to
about it.
know. Hopeful. Like, when does it
Oh,
end?
yeah, well, it was so funny because I exactly what you just said. I first of all, interestingly, I for the most part, I don't know, I kind of tried to protect sleep, but I was also somebody who like I would sometimes stay up very late, more studying than being out, which says something about how cool I was.
What a surprise. That's so
No,
weird.
very weird, unlike me. But then the other thing was like certainly as I entered the workforce, both interning when we were at Lehman Brothers and certainly in consulting and private equity, there were a lot of times like we were up very late for work and just things needed to get done, whether it was promises to the client or milestones on a deal. And it meant that my sleep was pretty irregular. And oftentimes it felt like hard to control. And in a lot of ways, I kind of normalized this sense of drowsiness during the day, especially being in a meeting where I wasn't presenting, of just feeling tired and almost that level of droopiness and not realizing actually what an indicator that was of how probably just chronically fatigued I was. And then
Yeah.
obviously like learned better behaviors in between, but certainly with an infant, all of it brought me all the way back to basically that period of my life of being a little bit out of control, not really being able to set a super predictable schedule for a while, being subject to the whims of somebody else, in this case, a small crying baby, and really how you sort of figure out how to adapt through that. So it resonates. And you talked about just the conversations that you had with your partner up front. How did you guys talk about this? How did you decide what was important to you and how you were going to approach sleep?
Yeah. So part of it is, I think the two of us recognizing that we like sleep and that we are not good people when we don't get sleep. And you have to be self-aware in that. I'm a person, if I am hungry, I'm a monster, and we know that, and we have to plan for it. My partner will pack snacks for me before he thinks to pack for the baby because he's like, "I don't want you. Hey, you sound like you're getting a little hangry. Maybe you should eat."
Hungry.
Part of it is know thyself. Like, don't lie to yourself. we all know if we're a giant raging bitch if we have not slept. If you are that person, just acknowledge it, admit it, and we can plan around that. So part of that was, there's a lot of debate in the mom community and the parent community around sleep training. Okay. People who are vehemently opposed to it, people who like this method over this, etc. For us, because we knew that sleep was important to us, because we know that we can't show up and function as the type of parents we want to be if we're sleepy and tired and cranky. And that's not really, we're not going to be nice to each other. We're not going to be patient with the baby. That's not how we want to show up as parents. So we said the most important thing is to try and get the baby on a good enough sleep schedule that they can sleep through the night, because then we can show up and do what we need to do. That was what's important to us. And I know there are people out there who don't believe in sleep training. Maybe you fast forward through this, maybe you listen a little bit. But that was what was important to us. Like that was that choice. And so I started reading. So other great thing I did, I read sleep training books while I was pregnant, because I said, how the hell am I going to read a book? Most people these days, especially our generation and younger, cannot read a book. Okay. Attention span has apparently gotten so bad, people cannot even read a book. So I said, how the hell would I read a book while I'm sleep deprived so I can figure out how to not be sleep deprived? That wasn't going to happen. So
Yeah.
I read these books while I was pregnant and my mind was still working and I was still getting decent enough sleep until like that last month of pregnancy when things are really challenging to do everything. And I started to take some notes because for me, I'm the type, I just need a foundation so that when the baby came, I couldn't remember everything from the book, but I remembered which book there was something in there or which specific tool I was maybe looking for, and that there was something there that I need to go and re-reference as opposed to having zero foundation and having to actually flip through an entire book to find it. So that I found incredibly helpful. And we really focused on trying to get the baby on a consistent schedule and sleep schedule. And we probably got that nailed down by, I think, somewhere between 3 and 5 months. She was decently sleeping through the night, or maybe only waking up once, if at all. And that helped immensely because I was a zombie those first couple of weeks of the baby. I couldn't, it was
Totally.
horrible. I was like, I'm not going to make it. My body's going to just give up on me.
What'd you do? How'd you handle it?
What did I do? Honestly, I think I just had to push through it, and it was really, really painful those first couple weeks. Like, I do not like being in discomfort. I think some people thrive there these days. Like they're they're so used to the discomfort. I do not want to be uncomfortable at all in my life. And if you listen to one of our prior podcasts, I think it was probably the last one when we talked about eating, you'll know my story about suffering from a chronic digestive disorder where I was in pain for like 15 years of my life. I don't want to be in pain anymore in my life. And so that brought me back to a time period where I felt really shitty, where every moment I was in some sort of pain. And I think this maybe speaks to mindset. What I really did was kept telling myself that there would be an end to this,
Yeah.
like a positive end, not
It's a phase.
like
Yeah.
yes, I just needed to get through the day. And I tried to take things one day at a time because thinking about this continuing in perpetuity was actually disempowering. And so trying to shorten the time frame and just focus on getting through this moment, this hour, today was how we made it through, at least for
Yeah.
me. What
Yeah.
about
That's
you?
honestly, really similar. So my husband and I also acknowledged early that sleep was going to be one of probably the most important thing that we had to navigate in, with a baby. And in particular, it was just the recognition. My husband, by the way, again, is in the fire department. And so he is used to being on a schedule where they work
They work
24
24
hours.
hours. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, 2 to 4 days off, just depending. But that means that they are working overnight, get calls in the middle of the night, and so he kinda gets patchy, a couple hours of sleep on those nights and makes up for a little bit on the others. And so we had a couple things. One was the approach that we found very helpful was what Pamela Druckerman lays out in Bringing Up Bebe around this whole French idea of the
The little
pause.
pause.
She called it, yeah. And it, we did that for both kids. And basically, if you're unfamiliar with the book, what she talks about is this concept that when babies cry, typically they're just learning how to connect their sleep cycles. And when they're very little, basically their sleep cycles are about 90 minutes long. And what happened as you age is that you learn how to connect those sleep cycles so that you get elongated periods of sleep. But babies don't know how to do that yet. And so they wake up at the end of every one, they may fuss for a little bit. And mostly what she talks about is how if you don't give them an opportunity to self-soothe, to calm back down, that they don't really learn how to connect those sleep cycles so that every time they wake up, they think it's time to
Mom's coming.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that something needs to be done. So, what I loved about this was that basically, I think a lot of people hear sleep training and they think of an
Further method.
hour, whatever, of letting their baby cry it out. What was great about this is the approach that she recommended, which really worked for us twice, was to just give your baby a minute when they wake up and start crying and really watch and observe them. And it's kind of this question, in the first couple weeks, obviously, you mostly just pick them up when they cry. But as they get a little bit older, even like a couple weeks old, certainly a month or two old, you give them a minute anytime they're crying and just kind of like watch and see how they react. And the idea is that sometimes they wake up and they're clearly hungry. Their eyes are open, they're a little bit thrashy, and like it's a different sounding cry. Versus other times it's like a little more muted, their eyes might be closed, it sounds a little bit more whiny. And what we found with both kids was like it would maybe go on for like a minute or two and then would quiet down. And sometimes they just fell back asleep without us doing anything. And then we found they were very easy milestones. They were easy to remember. But it was at 8 weeks, both kids slept about 8 hours. And then 11 weeks, we got 11 hours for the first time. And then it was
So
the same
yeah,
thing as you said, Jess. It was like in that sort of like 4 to 5 months range, we were solidly, consistently 12 hours and didn't have to do like a prolonged sort of sleep training in the way people think about it.
yeah, and I remember reading Bring It Baby and the idea of la pause, and it's actually still it shows up, and I think so we certainly tried that. It didn't quite work for our baby,
Okay,
but
interesting.
again, had read other books as well, so had a couple different modalities and tools in our toolbox. We also read, I think, 12 hours by 12 weeks, and so I think the point is what I have found about kids and sleeping is that none of it is intuitive.
Yeah,
It's not quote unquote intuitive. It's not what you think it is. And so for me, just reading those books gave me a new concept and idea for how to think about kids' sleep that I wouldn't have known otherwise. And
totally.
so it allowed me to try and understand what was going on, the idea of like, oh, they have to connect sleep cycles. And they need so last night, my baby's, almost a year and a half at this point. Last night my baby woke up at like 2:30 and was crying. I remember la pause, right? So I'm not gonna rush in there. And I figured she's just between cycles or she's having a bad dream or something. Let me give her a minute. So I get up and go to the bathroom while I'm waiting for her to calm down. By the time I'm done with the bathroom, she's gone back to sleep. Right. But
Fascinating.
if I wasn't familiar with that concept, I might still be rushing in anytime the baby cries. Right. And then you're creating a situation where the baby expects you in the middle of the night. Or the baby is
Yeah.
expecting milk in the middle of the night at 2 years old, which the experts will tell you they do not need. That's a conditioned response. It's really understanding some of this and using those tools.
Totally. And we have like a very interesting anecdote. So like our kids were sleeping great. From that point on basically. And they actually we had them share a room. They still share a room when they were young. When our son was probably 8 or 9 months, we put them in together because they were both sleeping very consistently. But when our daughter was like 2.5, we traveled to go visit my mother-in-law. Who knows what happened, but she had, obviously anytime you sleep in a different place, at least for us, like we we usually saw some disruption in sleep for the
Sure,
kids, just a
that's
harder time
normal.
falling asleep or whatever. And our daughter woke up at like 2 in the morning, very upset, like she'd had some scary nightmare or something. And we could not calm her back down. And my mother-in-law lives in a 200-year-old colonial farmhouse. Like and our my sister-in-law and her husband and their three kids at the time were there. And so we're all on like this little
So she
floor.
woke up the whole house basically.
Basically, yes, including her brother who she was sharing a room with. So we were like trying to calm her down and do all the stuff we never do and would never advise anybody do of like, okay, can we bring her in our bed? Like, how do we hold her for longer? Have her fall asleep back with us? We were still going at 6 in the morning, 4 hours later. And completely broken. My husband and I just look at each other like, we have to go home. We can't, we
Yeah,
can't do
yeah,
it. But it was so
these
fun.
kids will break you. They will
Yeah,
break you
oh
down.
my God.
The best laid intentions out the window.
We were broken. And then but then so we go home and then our daughter like did it again the first night home. And we're like, "Oh my God." And now we're kind of we somehow like very quickly established this habit of like, "Okay, well let's see if we can like sort of console her and get her back down." And this went on for a week until we finally called our pediatrician and we're like, oh my God, help.
What's
She's been an
happening?
amazing sleeper her whole life. And like, what did we just do? And he put us onto a program called Awesome Little Sleepers, which basically is the form of sleep training I talked about, which was just you walk your kid through what's going to happen at bedtime. You help, and we already had a good bedtime routine, so that was like that was less impactful. But the real crux of it was like we had a conversation with her around we need to stay in our room at bedtime. Sleep is so important for you. It's important for mom and dad. What's going to happen is like at bedtime, we're going to close the door. And if you come out, like then basically we have to lock the door. And you can decide how many chances you want to give the kid or what you do.
'Cause they
But
can walk and get out of bed at that point.
they can walk and get out of bed. She was in a toddler bed, and so she could escape. It was actually funny. We had the monitor on the first night, and it was like for a while, it was like she didn't even grasp the idea that she could leave her bed, even though there was like a toddler rail so she could walk out. And we are watching her on the monitor as she's inching
Figures it
toward the
out.
gap. She's sitting on the edge, and we're like, don't do it. Don't. Eventually she leaves, and we're like, oh God, like the seal has been broken. But in any case, that worked for us for resetting. It took a couple days, but it was an interesting reminder of like just how important it is to have good guardrails and structure around sleep because like I swear, especially with sleep, you do things one time and it's so easy for it to become normal.
Well, I think that's the key too is the normalization. I think
Yeah.
that's it sounds like both of us were on the same page where we weren't accepting the idea that like terrible sleep is just it's normal. And that's what everyone sort of tees you up for when you're getting ready to have a baby. Like, oh, I guess you won't be sleeping for the next 5 years. Because there was a generation of parents. I think my accountant tells this to me every time I speak to him that his kid just did not sleep for like years. And I'm just like, that sounds horrible. And in my mind, I'm like, I will
Horrible.
not accept that. I don't care how much money I have to pay. I will find some consultant to fix this because I don't think it has to be that way. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the empowering things with you and I. It's like don't accept something just because you think it has to be this way. Question, does it have to be this way? And there's a whole community of people who say, no, actually, there are ways to get your kids to sleep. There are different ways, but there's a whole community of people saying, like, you don't have to just be like, well, I won't sleep until they're 5.
Yeah, or till they're 12. And then by the way, everyone says you stop sleeping at teenage years, which we haven't gotten to yet, but
There are different reasons. Yeah. There's
different
always
reason.
something.
But
Lock the
I
windows.
totally agree, and I think what you said up front, I would completely echo for us, which was both the recognition of how important sleep was for us to be able to show up like the parents we wanted. I mean, I think at a certain point, like what person doesn't feel some type of impairment when they're sleep deprived or super tired relative to like when you're rested? But the other thing was like it's so important to the kids and I feel like one of the interesting observations about having a good sleep schedule and structure was that when anytime we really tried to be very much sort of hold the line on the schedule that we had laid out and make sure that we protected nap times and meal
Mhm.
times and that we were home and that we really didn't deviate very far from that structure. And so like the couple times per year when we did, there were just massive
You
differences.
could tell the
Did
difference.
show oh my god, in terms of, like, their mood, how well they played with each other, like, the emotional stability, if you will.
Yes.
I mean, it's night and day different, and, like,
Which makes
and
sense if you think about us. If we don't
100%.
get sleep, think about how
Yeah,
we react.
with
And
less
that's part of
tools to deal with it.
correct. Well, some adults just same amount of tools as these toddlers. Right.
That's also fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's where you see it for sure. And it's also stuck out to me what you talked about earlier was when you were at jobs that required you to work late and they were affecting your sleep. And there's a normalization around that as well. And I think that was one of the earlier differences that I recognized, right? I recognized it back in college where I'm like, I'm not pulling an all nighter. Like, that's not going to help me. And also, I'm such a massive planner and dork that I was studying for the test like 3 weeks before the test, whatever. But when I got to those jobs at iBanking and consulting, I recognized very quickly that the schedule that they wanted me to work on did not work for me. I remember even specifically consulting that, you know, the partners or your manager would be like, okay, I need this done like tonight. You need to send it tonight. So you like rush to send it tonight. And then you don't hear anything the next day until like 3 o'clock. Okay.
Or, like, 7 PM.
Right. The earliest, right?
Yeah.
3 o'clock. So you're sitting all morning really not doing much because you're waiting for feedback on the thing that you sent them. They send that back to you at the end of the day. And now I'm supposed to spend from at like 5 o'clock and sit down and build a model. And I know that at that point in the day, my head is hazy because I don't do my best work at night. We talked about this in the last episode about energy. I know I'm the first thing in the morning. That's when I'm firing on all cylinders. And so, yeah, the idea of work, having to do my best work and analytical deep work in the back part of the day, and then possibly have my sleep messed up, I immediately knew like this life is not for me. But I think a lot of people either don't question it and they're like, well, this is just what's required. And I was the one who was like, well, A, is this required? And B, is this for me then? And I got myself out of that situation because I wasn't going to damage my body more than I needed to. Remember, I was still dealing with this digestive disorder. So I was already suffering. I didn't need more suffering in my life. And I think a lot of people just accept their circumstances and just be like, well, this is the way it is. And I'm here to say, like, is it? Does it have to be that way?
Well, it's just bringing me back to one of my early jobs. I was on something, and it was like one of those all hours type of initiatives. And I had gone to bed probably at 2:30 in the morning. My phone rings at 4:45. It was like before I even put my phone on silent overnight because nobody called at the time. But my phone rings at 4:45 and I see it and it's like one of the partners. And I was like, "Oh my God." And I was like, smack myself in the face and like pick up the phone. He's like, "Oh, hi. I don't know if you saw my email, but I have a meeting with the CEO in like 2 hours. And like I was hoping you just run some models for me," and like firing off numbers. I was like, "Oh my God, where am I?" And go and splash some cold water on my face. And I sent him over something, did my best. And then I get into the office a couple hours later and I was like, "That was wrong. That was wrong."
100%. How can it be right when you're doing it at 5 o'clock in the morning after 3 hours of sleep? But think
And his
about it
email,
now. Yeah. Oh, did you see my email? Yeah. Okay. That's what I was
he sent
doing.
it at 2:45. No, I had not seen.
Yeah. Well, okay. Think about that now. You are a leader. Can you ever imagine requiring that of your team? Can you ever imagine making a promise
No, it's insane.
to another CEO and be like, "Yeah, I'll get my team up at 5 in the morning so that you can have this ridiculous thing that you asked for because you can't plan ahead." Like,
Totally.
that's where I go, "Where do people have the gall?" Nobody's thinking downstream. Nobody seems to care about what it would take to do that. And that was my biggest gripe in consulting is that I thought people overpromised and they because they wouldn't underdeliver, they would just squeeze and force things that I did not think were appropriate, but also like you're not getting your best work from me if you want me to operate this way.
And by the way, exactly to your point, I mean, when he got in, I asked him how it went, and he was like, "Actually, we didn't even use what you put together." I was like,
Oh, of
"Thank God."
course, of course.
But also but also I think it is a little bit of like the at all cost mentality, which look like sometimes stuff does come up and is pressing. I think there are plenty of times where it's like it is actually just a function of this could have been managed, scoped, and scheduled much more thoughtfully than it has been.
And somebody could have just pushed back a little bit.
100%. And I think it's something, especially certainly like as I've gotten more senior and certainly as I see people in the workforce, of like helping make sure that the culture there improves, I think is a huge priority because again, at the end of the day, it just like, look, you can put, even if you didn't care about the impact on the people, the fact is nobody's producing good work. So it's both not good and really harming the people on your team, and
And the
that's super
longevity.
problematic.
Well,
Yeah,
they have research that shows being sleep deprived is the equivalent of showing up to work drunk.
drunk.
And we have very clear policies around we do not accept people showing up to work drunk and
And
doing
yet,
things drunk. And yet, and this is the big thing, the banks got a lot of pushback and there's been a lot of bad press for the banks in the last couple of years because there have been some high profile incidents of junior employees dying
yes.
or committing suicide because they're working way too many hours and forcing the leaders there to pay attention to the number of hours that people are working. Because again, you're working 80 hours a week. I'm telling you, not only is the research show, but I am also telling you, and obviously
Yeah.
we're going to listen to me, that the work they're doing is shit at that point. So just why are you even asking for it? We need better planning. You need more resources. And the companies that I'm pushing back on here are saying they're reporting profits of like billions of dollars and millions of dollars. You have the money to hire more resources. You're just choosing not to. And that I have a problem with. And that's what drew me to this work. I don't just focus on individuals, but there's a lot of systematic problems and cultural problems. And I try and come at it from both ways because I can't just keep telling my clients, "Well, you just need to sleep more," when their environment's created, designed to tell them, like, that's not really available to you.
Yeah, and that is one where in particular I feel like I totally agree. It needs to be a systematic solve. And I think it's something, if you are further along in your career, especially in an industry like this where it has historically operated like this, I think it's imperative on all of us to be thinking about like what are we actually asking of the team and the norms that are set. It was something on a related note that I was very conscious of and even becoming a mom of I wanted it to be normal that, like, I did go home and have dinner and do bedtime with my kids.
Mhm.
Like, there's a little bit of recognizing that work is obviously a very important piece of who we are, but it's certainly not all of who we are. And, like, no matter what stage of life you're in, like, there can and should be things outside of it that are also important to you. And obviously the balance can and will shift along the way in terms of, like, how much time and energy and effort you're allocating to one thing versus another. But I feel like at a certain point, it's beneficial to know one if something becomes so all-consuming that everything else gets really compromised.
Yeah, and what came to mind is I'm thinking about, yeah, and we all have busy weeks when we have to
Yeah.
make some sacrifices. I think the
Yeah,
problem is when you've made excuses why every week is now a busy week,
totally.
there's an
Yes.
urgency culture, and so that brought me to this thought of, well, you have to find moments to pull back and refill your cup. Right? And this is a conversation I have a lot with clients around, well, what are you doing to refill your cup? So sleep is one way, of course, to refill our cup. Eating is one way that we like literally refuel ourselves. But what are some of the things that you do when you notice your energy is waning a little bit? Like today, before we got on this call, I felt my energy dipping because we're filming this in the middle of the afternoon when I know my energy dips and it's at its lowest levels and I was feeling it. Now I feel good because we're chatting. But what do you do to refill your cup?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, for me, there are a couple things. Like my standards are, and like what I feel like I really need to protect are the things that we really talked about here, which like the sleep, the move and practice, the food, as we talked about. Getting those right is huge. Otherwise, like I really enjoy spending time with my family, and there's a lot that goes into it. Sometimes even just like getting to sit and be still and read a book with my kids is so super nice. Or my husband and I have made a very good practice out of like keeping a protected date night every 2 weeks, basically.
Mhm.
And then the other thing for me are just, like, actually getting out and spending time with friends, ideally in person, just makes a big difference, I feel like, to my overall sense of energy. Those are the things that I typically find. I also try to make sure that I'm not waiting until that, like, I desperately need a vacation to take some time. Like, I feel like
Mhm.
a little bit the thoughtful mapping at the beginning of the year of like when our breaks are going to be, when we're traveling has been really helpful. So there's always sort of something to look forward to that we've done for ourselves as a couple or as a family. All those things have mattered a bunch to me. What about for you?
I think some of the same things, certainly having something to look forward to, I really like. I think it's also important then to enjoy the present moment. So you said like sometimes just sitting and being still and reading a book with my kids, to me, that just speaks to sometimes I can fall into this. I'm always planning ahead. I have to remember to just actually just enjoy and soak up time in the present. So I think that's important to keep in mind. For me, what I need time to myself. I need time for me and my girls. And by that, I mean my Real Housewives and everything on Bravo TV. Listen, this again, another perfect instance of the difference between Teresa and I. I can feel when I have not had TV time. Like I can sort of like I feel it like in my soul. There's like a restlessness and tiredness. I'm like, oh, why am I like on edge? I'm like, oh, I didn't get to watch TV last night. I didn't get to watch my shows. And I need that. That's what I need. And it's because I've always found there's a lot of women that I know in my life and I've worked with, like anxious folks, your brain never shuts off. For me, when I'm feeling like my brain is running, the thing that will shut my brain off and shut it down is watching these reality TV shows. That is when I'm just focused on them. It's fun for me. For other folks, maybe that doesn't turn your brain off, but for me, it's important to find an activity where my brain can just it can just power down. And I find even on the weekends before I had baby, I was able to do this more often, but sometimes I would just need to sit down at like 3, 4 o'clock. I'm too tired. Just need to watch an hour of TV, and then it's almost like I took a nap. That's my version of taking a nap. I don't do naps. I hated taking naps when the baby first came. I had to force myself to do it, but I just don't like naps. This is my version of a nap. So that's one thing that I do to fill my cup. I've gotten into reading
Love reading.
fiction. Reading
Okay.
fiction. So I've strictly been a nonfiction reader for like the last 20 years. Aside from Harry Potter, I really have not read a fiction book since I was a child. And I just got into like reading fiction. And now it's kind of ruining my life because I feel like I'm reading too much. Like it's an obsessive thing. It's a bit of a problem. So I have to find some balance there. Now it's even taking away from watching my shows. I'm behind on my shows. But I think the point is I have something to look forward to. And sometimes if you don't know what's important to you, I see this with people around me when they do have an hour break. Or we had, for instance, we had one day this year where it was a holiday, but the daycare wasn't closed. But me and my partner were off from work. I was off from work because I can take off whenever. So I just made it a holiday. But he was actually off from work. And so I said, let's capitalize on this because otherwise I know what's going to happen. You're going to sit down and you're going to be working on your to do list for half the day,
Totally.
and then you're not going to have any fun. So we made a reservation to do a date night. We did a nice lunch at like a very nice restaurant in the city where, oh, you'll like Teresa, we ran into Danielle Balud at this restaurant.
That's
He
so
was sitting
fun.
there enjoying lunch with
That's
his
awesome.
friends. It was so
Very
weird and fun. So it's just like a nice day. But I find if people don't have hobbies or they don't know what their hobbies are or they don't know the thing that will bring joy or refill their cup, when you do get that hour break or that half day break and nothing's planned, you waste it. You
yeah.
either are doing something on a to do list instead of resting, or you are scrolling or watching this, or something that's not actually important to you, but it just sucked your time away.
Yeah.
So I like to make to-do lists even for fun things, so I know
Oh,
that they get prioritized.
I completely agree. And I thought it was one of the interesting things about I had time off in between finishing last job and starting this one. And one of the things that's been very interesting is just how much it really underscored the need to just be very intentional about like where the day goes and what I want to
Mhm.
get done. It's phenomenal even like just how fast time can go.
Oh, yeah, it slips away.
Even without a full-time job at a moment. And, like, in a lot of ways, obviously, plenty of people have their full-time job being a mom and, like, all the things that go into it, so it also completely makes sense. But what I found very helpful, exactly as what you just said, was being very clear about, like, what I needed to get done. And one of my favorite things to do work-wise was create this, like, weekly email basically that I send to my manager, but candidly, it's like much more for myself than it is for them. And it's really a tool to hold myself accountable. But like what are the major priorities that I have for the week ahead and what did I get done relative to what I said I was going to do last week? And it ends up being this really nice sort of like forcing mechanism to help really focus my energy on like what do I truly need to move forward. And always when I'm writing that email, I fill out my to-do list along the way of like what are the little things that I'm going to do that build to these bigger sort of goals I have on a weekly basis, and then how does that fit to the things that I said I really want to accomplish like this quarter, this year, or whatever it is. And I find that so helpful for just directing where I'm focused and really making sure that I'm working on the stuff that matters and not like exactly as you just said, spending half the day wondering what I should be doing to make the most use of the day.
Yeah, and the theme here is about intentionality. So I'm not here to tell anyone they need to overschedule their day. I do know someone who has scheduled their day in 7-minute increments. They have more of a
I have never
military
done that.
background
Yeah.
and, no judgment, but that's my nightmare. So I'm not telling you to go and schedule every minute of your day, but the idea is to have intentionality. And I like that you talk about, you're thinking about, okay, well, what am I doing today versus this week that ladders up to my quarterly goals? So I approach goal setting, I like to call it the Russian nesting doll system,
Yes,
which is
totally.
you have to start with like the big goal. So the annual goal, what am I trying to accomplish this year? And this is both professionally and personally. You can do this, right? Like what's important to me this year that I want to get done? Okay, if that's what's important this year, then what do I need to get done this quarter that will help me get to that? If that's what I'm doing this quarter, then what do I need to do this month? Then what do I need to do this week? Then what do I need to do today? And I find there's like a lot of freedom in the framework. So even in my free time, I actually was inspired. I had a couple of clients who had moved to 4-day-a-week work weeks. And I was really inspired by that, especially around my pregnancy and planning for maternity leave, around what would it look like for me to actually move to 4 days a week. And one of the challenges that one of my clients had at the time was feeling like she should still be productive on that day off and it not actually operating the way it should, which is one, you're not getting paid for that day. So do not touch anything work wise because they're not
Yeah.
paying you for that. A lot of people have to take that 20% pay cut in order to do the 4 days. So they reduce your pay. So it's like, don't just touch anything work wise, but also them feeling like, well, I should be doing chores or I should be doing this or running errands. And again, the whole point was to take a day to refill your cup, to do something for yourself so that you have energy then to make it through the weekends when there is no daycare or school for your kids. I had the same challenge when I first was trying out 4-day-a-week work weeks. So I started to, now I have sort of this framework in mind, whether it's a weekend or it's my day off. I don't do anything quote unquote productive past noon. So if I want to
But
get
that's
up and get a couple of things done, I can do my things, be quote unquote productive, do those chores or finish something for work if I want. I can choose to do whatever I want with that time. But come noon, it's like pencils down. The rest of the afternoon is for me to just be lazy. Right. And if that means I sit on the couch and I watch 4 hours of TV, I'm allowed to do that. If it means I want to go for a walk, I can do that, or meet up with a friend, I can do that. But it's this idea of like, no more quote unquote doing. It's just about being after that time. And there's no guilt associated with it because I
yeah.
did my work. I've earned this break. And sometimes we don't feel like we deserve a break or like we've earned it. And we need little systems that give us that permission. If, the mindset, and that speaks to the mindset we want to talk about.
I was just gonna say, like, I
Yeah.
think that's the perfect segue into it because there is really something about like one of the things I guess I've struggled with most was especially early on as I became working mom was like the feeling like, oh my God, there are just so many things I should do, I'm supposed to do. And at a certain point, it's like it almost feels insurmountable. Like, how do I get all of
Oh,
this
yeah.
stuff
Suffocating.
done? Yeah, it's so much. It becomes really overwhelming. And I think that there's something about what I found really helpful was this level of intentionality, which, we've talked about a lot here. It's this lens of like what is actually important to you at this kind of moment or at this season. And in particular as it relates to energy, it was learning how to ultimately just come to the realization that me protecting my own energy and doing like creating space for the things that I needed to really show up in the way I wanted to as a mom, as a professional, as a partner was actually the thing that unlocked everything else. And there was a certain bit of like if I didn't protect that, then I just always felt compromised in how I showed up. I either didn't have patience with my kids when if they were having a tantrum or they were upset about something or something at work would really get to me. And it wasn't until I was like almost the recognition that I just needed to very fiercely protect my space so that I can be who I want to be, who I aspire to be in all those other settings that really unlocked it. And so it was almost this lens of like exactly what you just said. One, giving myself permission. And then two, just starting to get into a little bit this like flexible dialogue with myself of like what actually worked. Like what were the
Mhm.
things I needed to protect no matter what? What were the nicer to haves? And how do I sort of treat that as a like hypothesis written in pencil that I continue to sort of adapt and flex over time as everything in life evolves.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in one of our previous episodes that you engage in a lot of exercise and was it Peloton that says everyone's an athlete, first people's at
Yep.
athletes?
Yep.
And so I always go back to this idea of for our very overproductive overachievers who feel like we don't deserve rest or there's always more to be done. I always go back to the athlete analogy, which is professional athletes always build in like rest days. That is actually part of their schedule and part of their routine and part of
Totally.
their training because they know you can't push. Like rest is required and recovery is required so then you can push again. But somehow we think that's acceptable for a professional athlete, but not for, a white collar worker. And so we need to come back to this idea and recognize that, yeah, it is not selfish to say, I need to block out 30 minutes to eat lunch today and not just blow through lunch. How is that selfish? You're not until they completely replace us by machines. Humans need to eat. You are allowed. And by the way, if you were an hourly worker, it would be required by law that you had time to eat. For some reason, because they pay us a salary, all of a sudden we think that we're not entitled to time to sit down and eat and like block our calendars. It's bullshit. So yeah, we need time to eat. We need time to rest because that is how we show up as the parent we want to be, as the partner we want to be. It's imperative. And it's not a selfish thing. It's not an extra thing. It's just part of the regimen, just like an athlete.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome analogy because at the end of the day, it's like, and by the way, there is so much effort and focus on how they recover.
Yeah,
It's the foam rolls, it's the ice baths, it's like this, it's the
you're
sleep.
right. It's not just like sit on the couch. There's active recovery.
Totally.
Like it's
There's
intentional too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
And you referenced it earlier, but even just the conversation around how work can sometimes go in seasons and this idea that like yes, at a certain point all of us have some busier sprints from time to time. And you mentioned, and I think it's exactly right, of just it's the awareness that there's a difference between you have a couple weeks where you're really heads down on something, where there's a lot going on, and something like that that's going on for months or quarters or years where it's like it's just hard to operate. And I would nuance too, because like there's a little bit, I think it's so early, and I think there's a lot that needs to be thought about more broadly societally on this, if you will. But like there so much that needs to be thought about, I think, especially for people in early careers, because there is so much of a dynamic that in your first couple of years that you're really supposed to sacrifice, to give it all, to work super hard, to be constantly available, whatever that is. And in some ways, like the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle of like personally, I feel like I am somebody who benefited from doing that early. But there's a point where it's really destructive. And I think we're closer to that side of things than we are to the side where it's like actually people should be working more. And I think even being mindful of like the tone that's set in your organization, in your team around how that's treated, how that's thought about, how that's talked about, and ultimately what's rewarded is super, super, super important because
yeah. Those conversations are happening because of Gen Z. I remember reading lots of news reports. I mean, they did this to us. We are millennials. They did it to generation before us.
yes,
Every generation is going to call the new generation lazy. They don't want to work like we did. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. But this was exactly the conversation of like, well, Gen Z's just not buying that crap of like that I need to kill myself and that's just part of it. And they're like, no, I want balance and I want it from day one. And there's been a lot of like talk from those in leadership positions who didn't get there that way.
yeah,
And I think it's just remembering you climbed up the ladder. Do not A, pull up the ladder behind you.
yeah.
Okay. But two, be open to building a staircase. Be open to building an elevator. Just because you had to climb up a ladder and crawl through a window doesn't mean that you shouldn't build a front door on the ground level for someone else. Okay.
Totally. Yeah,
And that's
and
what it comes down to.
yeah, I think that's so right. Because like, at the end of the day too, it's ultimately you could extend the analogy to, like, if we just did things the way that we had always done things, like, we would be nowhere, like,
Correct. We'd
great.
all be living in like tents, you know,
Horse and buggies, yeah, like, before yeah,
we would
that
be Amish. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with the Amish, but do you want to be Amish? Let's be honest.
I probably wouldn't choose it, no offense.
No, and nobody listening to this podcast wants to be Amish. So like cut the bullshit. Let's evolve.
Yeah, and I think that's especially why it's like, how do you continue to just elevate the culture and improve it? Because, like, at the end of the day, I mean, ultimately, so much I feel like what even inspired us to get going with this podcast, certainly for me with the book, was like right now it does feel like there's a little bit of like this cloud, and that it's, especially again for working moms, but candidly like for women, period, and for lots of underrepresented groups. It just everything just feels hard, and I think there's this sense of ultimately, to me, what's so inspiring about all of this is like, how do we just make it easier for people to get more in touch with what lights them up and feel like they are doing things, living lives that are of purpose, that really reflect the reality that they want to create, so that everybody just walks around a little more excited with more energy in their step, feeling like they're here doing stuff that matters. Like, would be awesome. Like,
Amen.
if we can just make like a little dent in that broader
Yeah, how
mission.
do we reduce suffering? I don't want people to suffer. I want to ease people's suffering, and I
Yeah,
want to make people's lives better. To your point, I want people to enjoy their life. I want people to enjoy their work. I want
yeah,
people to enjoy each other. And yeah, to do that, I think we have to question why we've been doing things a certain way, if there's a better way, and be willing to build a better system. And there is a lot that we've made some progress, and now it feels like people are trying to pull us back. And that's why we're here to talk about, hey, there are some external factors, some systemic things that need to be addressed. And we will talk about those. And because it's not an either or. And what are the things that we can have some control over that are within our grasp? And what are some ways that we can do things that will ease our suffering while we're trying to work on the bigger structural issues? Let's
totally.
do both. And that's what we're here to
Totally.
talk about.
Yeah, and if you missed the earlier episode where we also talked about energy, again, we talked a ton about food and movement on that side. And here, obviously, got much more into the sleep and mindset side. I hope you take away from this even just one thing that you can start sort of experimenting with to really better protect your own energy and really think about what is it that actually helps you preserve and protect what you need to be your best in all the places that it matters to you. Try one thing. Start there, try making a change, see how it impacts your day, your week, and from there keep going.
Beautifully said. Focus on yourself, what it is you really need. And if you don't know what that is, that's where you need to start. Spending some time really listening to your body, to yourself, what it is you need, so that then you can figure out how to get it. And if you need
Totally.
any more help with that, feel free to reach out to Teresa and I. We got tons of ideas and people in your networking community that have ideas that they can share with you as well. We didn't figure this out all on our own. Rely on that community, and we'll just keep this conversation going in our next episode, and we'll hopefully make things better for you, give you new things to think about, and just honestly get a conversation started. So thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.